Welcome back to Martins and More. My name's Maury Rutch.
And I'm Spoon Phillips.
And today's episode is brought to you by our Patreon members. Join our growing community for early access to every episode, exclusive video versions of the podcast, behind-the-scenes footage, full-length product demos, and more. We appreciate you. Spoon, what's happening?
How many guesses do I get?
9.
I give up. Well, it's a beautiful summer day here. If you like summer days, and I actually prefer summer days, even the hot ones over the complete opposite. I'll take that over February, any July of the year.
Yeah, I have to agree. A lot of people around here talk about how hot it's getting, but you don't have to shovel sunshine. And I know that the other joke that goes around once in a while, can you imagine if we had like 3 feet of snow? It would be so hot to shovel that stuff. So, Season 5, Episode 2, or technically Season 5, Episode 3, because if you're watching this episode, you recognize Season 5, Episode 1 had to be done in 2 parts, thanks to the really cool subject matter, the history of all the changes in Martin production over the years. We couldn't squeeze that into 1 episode. But this is the second topic in 3 episodes, and it comes to us from a viewer. Billy Kebab 1 writes, I'd like to know the backstory of how Spoon got so close to the folks at Martin. Did he ever work for Martin? Did he just hang around the outside of the factory for months? I want to find out, does he mean like in a tent, or did he go home and come back? Did he sneak in and take over an empty office? I know some of those questions and their answers, but there is at least one there that I'm going to find out with you. Spoon, would you mind taking today to let us know how in the world did you ever get hooked up with Martin from the very beginning and walk us through the timeline about it?
Well, I'm going to have to Google my own bio here. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, that's a surprising query from a listener, so thank you for that. I appreciate the interest. Yeah, I guess we can talk about that, and I think it will also tie in with your own connections with Martin. So when you say, did he hang out behind the factory for months? We have a very good friend who really did that, named Dick Bolk. When Dick was a young man, he was very into woodworking, loved woodworking. And he stopped by the back door of Martin, as I remember him saying, and asked him if they had any scrap wood, and they sent him all around to the dumpster, and he started raiding their dumpsters back there for a very long time. And somebody asked him what he did with all that stuff, and he either by coincidence or not, he had some of his decorative bowls and other things that he would make, but he also made musical instruments, and he showed them some sort of experimental musical instruments. Dick, of course, you'll correct us if I'm completely misremembering this. And they asked him if he'd be interested in working at the factory, and he went around to the front door and walked in. If anybody remembers the old song Signs, this was Martin was a pretty conservative family and pretty conservative company at the time. So they did not actually have a sign saying, long-haired freaky people need not apply, but they might as well have. And so Dick walked in with his long hair, and the receptionist was not particularly welcoming when he was talking about applying for a job. And somebody said something, well, there's only something available. It's actually for a draftsman. He said, well, I actually have a degree in drafting from Lehigh University or wherever it was he went to school, and or something to that effect. So they were skeptical at first, and he happened to meet Mr. Martin at the time. He was offered a job, and they asked him if he could start to work on Monday, and he said, no, I've got to go see Bob Dylan. So he went to the Bob Dylan concert in Philadelphia instead of starting work for Martin, but he started the next day as a draftsman. The rest is history. But yeah, he was dumpster diving behind the factory for months before he actually got hooked up with Martin. My origin stories aren't nearly that colorful. And I'm trying to think. Now, you and I met at the very first, what later became known as Martin Fest, on the first day. And in fact, as I was coming up to the cabin and from the parking lot, up on the hillside there at Nazareth Borough Park. I literally heard the words being sung, pulled into Nazareth, feeling half past dead. So they were starting to sing that. And when I went up on the porch, there was Dick Boak, who I had not met in person previously, and Maury Rutch, who I'd never met previously either, except on the Martin Guitar Forum. So, and a bunch of other people that I was meeting for the first time. So that was quite a thrill. And I saw Dick take a lead, and which he's one of those, like many guitar players. He's a much better guitar player than he thinks he is or gives himself credit for. But anyway, that was that's kind of tying in the three of us where that's concerned. My love for Martin guitars goes way back, though I didn't know it at the time. As a boy, I had no understanding of what brand of guitar people used or anything like that. And by coincidence, some of my most influential music contained Martin guitars. The very first record I bought with my own money was The Concert for Bangladesh, having grown up as a Dylan and a Beatles fan. And, with my lawn mowing money. And Bob Dylan's, and then I went to see the movie at the drive-in with my older brother. And Dylan is playing a D28 in his 5-song set. And though I think they may only show 4 songs in the movie. But I didn't understand that at the time, but I certainly listened to that record to death. Another record that I listened over and over and over to in my formative years was Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young's Four-Way Street, and particularly the sound of Neil Young's guitar on the acoustic solo Cowgirl in the Sand really put a Cupid's arrow in my heart of what, to me, acoustic guitar is supposed to sound like. And there's others that, I can cite from that around that same time. John Prine's first album, The Grateful Dead's American Beauty, various albums that it turned out that the guitars I was listening to were, in fact, D28s, D18s, and so forth. And D45s, of course, with Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young at various times. And as well as Neil Young's various D28s, Stills playing D28 at Woodstock. All that stuff. So that sound had hooked me early on. It wasn't really until I came to New York City that I started visiting guitar stores and really becoming aware of Martin guitars. And that and Acoustic Guitar Magazine and Frets Magazine, and seeing the ads for the Schoenberg soloists in those days when Eric Schoenberg was in a joint venture with Martin, where his resident luthier, which was originally T.J. Thompson, and followed by others, were basically hand carving, bracing, and bridges, and basically coming up with the vintage-like specs that would go on OMs that were made at the factory for Schoenberg's. Basically, TJ did most of the work, carved the necks, all that stuff, and then they would be assembled at Martin. But it was all using Martin lumber and all that. So that was something I really aspired toward, and would go to the guitar stores and play Martins and comment about them on the guitar forums and that sort of thing.
So, what years are you talking about the last part you just mentioned? About what time is this?
Okay, well, I arrived in New York City after graduate school in 1989. So that's, or I guess the fall of 88. So that's dating me. Of course, I entered college at the age of 12, like Carl Sagan. So, Doogie Howser. That was my nickname, in fact. Actually, that show wasn't even on the air yet, I don't think. So I got here in 88. I'd been here for a year in 84, so that's when it first kind of started. Then I went off to grad school and came back in 88, and also had done an internship at a off-Broadway theater, too, while I was in graduate school. So I was already beginning to get into going to see people play and going to the guitar stores and all that. So when my grandmother died, I got $1,000, and I came up with the other $1,000 to buy my first Martin guitar. And it was a custom 15, which was a model. There's multiple dealers that claim they were the first ones that started ordering custom shop D28s with V-necks and diamonds and squares and herringbone and, other little, open back tuners and all that stuff, though I think my custom 15 had closed tuners. But in any case, Martin had some models that were kind of stock models that they would offer dealers with a stock list of specs. One of them was a custom 15 because supposedly it was either the 15th order for a vintage style D28 with forward-shifted scallop bracing, or it was, I forget where the 15 came from, or it was a batch of 15 or whatever. And so I bought one of those from Mandolin Brothers, who was one of those dealers who claimed to be the first ones to do it. And that was my first Martin. I had been playing a tiny little mahogany Con, which means it was either the horn maker, so obviously they didn't make it, but it was their brand. It was basically a knockoff 00018, all plywood 00018 that had been my guitar. And I wasn't prepared for just what a handful of dreadnought really was to play on a daily basis, let alone a long scale V-neck. And so I fell in love with and paid way too much money to Matt Umanoff for a 1953 00018. And that I didn't realize at the time that he was basically a premium priced dealer. But it was a great guitar. And so those were my first two Martins. Before, this is all leading up to me somehow becoming involved with the Martin factory. Certainly, I didn't know at the time, but certain people within Martin had been reading stuff that I've written on the internet for a long time, before and after the founding of the unofficial Martin Guitar Forum. And a bunch of us were on Acoustic Guitar Forum, which had a lot of flaming, a lot of flamers, and they eventually basically shut it down because of all the, sort of vitriol that was on there. And but at the time, it was a wild west for guitar forums. And somebody posted on there, named Steve Stallings, posted on that forum saying, does anybody actually like Martin rather than just want to complain about him? And so a bunch of us piped in, and he started the unofficial Martin Guitar Forum, which is what how you and I became acquainted.
So if I can back you up just a second, I want to kind of put myself in your shoes at different parts of this story so the listeners can get a handle on it. This part of the story we haven't met yet, but if we're hearing what you said a few moments ago about you had the D15 custom and then you had a 00018, I would consider you a Martin expert in 2024. And if we ask you something about Martin, the details and the timelines and the history, when you're buying that first 00018 or buying that D15 custom, how well did you know the Martin lineup at that time?
Well, that's interesting because I went from 0 to 60, I guess, because I went from knowing nothing about models. As a kid, I didn't know. I asked somebody what kind of guitars Crosstell's Nash and Young played, and somebody told me Gibsons. But they were thinking about electric guitars back when everybody was playing an ES335 or something similar. And though, of course, Stills and Young were also playing their big Gretsch. But so I just assumed their acoustic guitars were Gibson. I had no idea until I started really looking into it. And I was also a big Kotke fan, too. And I really kind of discovered Kotke at the time when he was playing an MC28 and Sunburst MC28. So by coincidence, there's another Martin guitar that I was seeing and hearing without realizing it was a Martin guitar. But the guitar magazines and once I got into the guitar stores and, certain dealers, I just want to look up this website real quick just to share it with people because I don't remember what it's called. Okay. So there's a website out there now called WEXE Guitars, and it's Larry Wexer's site. Larry Wexer was one of the Mandolin Brothers. He wasn't one of the original ones, but he was Stan Jay's partner at the time I started visiting Mandolin Brothers. Oh, wow. And I learned more from Larry about vintage guitars than certainly anybody else. And he's been a private dealer of vintage guitars for a long time now, and certainly knows his stuff. Is a fabulous musician, and had performed in bands and stuff professionally and that sort of thing before he got into retail and now private dealerships and private dealings of guitars. But anyway, he was the one that really taught me the most about OMs and triple O's and this and a lot about the vintage Martin stuff and which was extremely helpful. And I used my own ears to kind of inform myself and do my own research and so I'd never been to Martin at this time. I had never had any direct dealings. I had published something on the internet about the history of the OM21, and that was really done for a birthday present for someone. A guy I grew up with was giving his wife an OM21 for her birthday, and so he had asked me to do it, but I ended up online. But I had called Martin to ask about that, and they immediately hooked me up with Dick Boak. So that's when I first time I talked with Dick Boak. And he was his usual humble self when I mentioned how, I felt like I was talking to a big shot at that time. But my first trip to Martin was, okay, so after I got that guitar, Martin didn't make a mahogany OM. So there was no OM18. They had never come out with, I guess they had done a OM18 special guitar of the month at one point. But that was really kind of before my time, and they were certainly not something you could just find. So I had gotten a Dana Bourgeois mahogany OM, and I had gotten a Collings OM1A. And so those had been my guitars. But then the whole Martin thing was going to happen. So, and by this time I had bought a used D18, 73 D18 that was a complete Frankenstein full of repaired cracks and all kinds of interesting things. They replaced bridge and all that sort of thing because I couldn't afford a D28. And then I went and bought a D28. Anyway, new, and in 2000, that same process had already been repeated with my getting the very first mahogany OM Martin put out in the modern times, which is the OM18V. Bought the very first one that came to town, and I got it because I couldn't afford an OM28V, but I ended up buying a used OM28VR shortly afterwards. Anyway, this is the story of my life. I can't afford the good one. I'll make it one this will be good enough for me, and then I'm buying the other one anyway. So I'm up to 5 Martins at this point. I had sold the big Dreadnought because it hurt my hands too much. I couldn't afford the vintage 0018 and the big guitar at the same time. So actually, I traded it in to Humanoff. And this is now Martin Fest. So now okay. Martin Fest is now coming up. So the very first Martin Fest was my very first trip to Nazareth, and the first time that I had met anybody in person from Martin. And
I know that, and I still find that hard to believe. That just doesn't make sense to me. In my mind, you're associated with Martin since like '88.
Yeah, exactly. So I had done a lot of my research and stuff, other than phone calls with Dick Boak. I had done it through like I said, people like Larry Wesker and became very, very obvious. Other than Matt and Larry, it was pretty quick to see in guitar stores the posers who pretended they knew what they were talking about. And so it wasn't long before I knew more than the guys at the other guitar stores, for the most part. And but those were still very good days. I mean, Manage was still in business, and Rudy Pensa was always very kind to me. They were not a Martin dealer, but he made basically jazz guitars, but he was very supportive. And Carlo Greco, the master builder, Guild's old master builder, had his shop on top of Rudy's shop, and I would go up and visit him and see the guitars he was making for people. And so it was a long I guess, labor of love sort of process of education. So then we go to the first Martin Fest, and you and I meet, and we become fast friends. And you invite me to do what's essentially a clinic at the grand opening of your shop in Coaldale, Pennsylvania. And so that, we had a bunch of different events. There were Howie Emerson performed on stage at the cinema next door, which was really nice of them. Other people performed. But I was in the shop on your little stage talking about different models that you had. The OM35 was there at the time, and the first Nakashima model and various things like that. So I was basically giving little talks about them and playing songs on them. And after that was over, this fella came up to me and asked me how long have I been a clinician at Martin. And I said, I'm not a clinician at Martin. I was just doing this as a favor for Maury. And he said, well, would you like to be a clinician for Martin? And I said, well, yeah, I'd like, that's, I guess. I had no idea who this guy was. So he gave me his card. His name was Tim Teal. And he was the head of, I don't remember what his title was then, but he was the chief designer then. And so that was my first official connection to Martin Guitars. And like I said, some people may have known about me before I knew about them. I certainly know I was on Mike Dickinson's radar long before I actually, knew him or met. I met him at at one of the early Martin Fests. Was the first time we actually spoke in person. So Tim and Mike sort of started becoming my initial connections inside the Martin Guitar Forum. Martin Guitar Factory, rather. And so that brings us up to, what was your grand opening? What was the date of that?
That was, I believe, the spring of 2003, because 2002 we met at Martin Fest in the summer, and I basically became a member of the unofficial Martin Guitar Forum in early 2002. And then I remember thinking that I wasn't really on the forum that long before the signs started being pointed towards, hey, we're going to have our very first get-together. And I thought, that's only an hour away. I should probably go. And I spent a couple of days thinking, that's stupid. And then maybe I'll go and if I don't like it, I'll just leave. And I'll end up, even if I have a great time, I don't have to stay at the hotel. I'll be the smart one. I could just go and have a good time in the afternoon. All these people have to pay for hotel rooms because they're from out of town. I'll do the smart thing, and I'll just go and hang out at the pavilion. If it's fun, I'll go home and have a good time. And if it's so fun, I could come back the next day. Ironically, and you might remember, the next day was a Monday, and I had to go to the dentist in the morning. And then I remember getting to Martin Fest on day 2 and wanting to sing with you so much, but I had this, I was Novocained up in my cheeks, and I couldn't, not that I couldn't talk or sing, but I was really numbed up. And then that was the second day. Fast forward a couple days later, you see all the pictures. I don't think there were any videos at the time, but all the pictures of all the fun that everyone had at the hotel in the evenings. I missed all the best parts, but that was our introduction. So at Martin Fest 2002, you and I meet, and then fast forward to answer your question, it's 2003, April or May, that we actually have our grand opening. And I do remember, and it's a little bit ironic that we're going to talk about this, there are things that are coming to my mind for the first time in a long time, or the first time ever. I can say without much doubt that looking back on the very first Martin Fest, you seem to be the person who knew the most about Martin guitars. We all had a love for it, and to have a forum that basically begins at all in 2002, and now it's everybody who's a part of that forum obviously has a passion for Martin guitars. But leaving that first weekend in person, I remember meeting an expert in Martins, along with a lot of other people who love to learn about them and continue to learn. But you seemed, and I can say this now looking back, like I said, 24 years or whatever it was, I can't picture you never knowing all this about Martin. And it's pretty interesting to hear how you're saying, you got those early guitars, and then you made some trips to guitar stores, and you had that rich environment where you were able to learn a lot from some really incredible people. By the time you did get to meet Dick Boak on the phone, and you got to meet Mike Dickinson and Tim Teal, I have a memory of they must have met you, and you must have had this knowledge and expertise since you were 17, 18 years old. And it's so funny to hear that when I met you, you hadn't been that expert about it all that many years. But it's pretty fascinating to actually see the chain of events. And that's when I got into the picture by introducing you to Tim Teal. In hindsight, would I have said to Tim Teal, check this guy out, if I knew 10 years before that, you didn't even know what a Martin was versus a Gibson, but it doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I think I mean, timeline-wise, I think we're really talking about maybe 84, 85 over that period. I guess I got to New York summer of 84 and then left for grad school in this about August 85. So that's when it first started happening. And I think that's when I started. Also, that's, I think, when I first saw the first ad in a magazine for a Schoenberg soloist and some of the mystique around the Schoenberg soloists. When it was still I was still a long way from actually seeing one in person. And so I guess we're looking at, so the first Martin Fest was 2002, yes, 2002. And so, I mean, that's still a good, so is it definitely, more than 10 years that it took me to, get to where I was by the time I was, showed up at Martin Fest. But, so I did go to, I did call up Tim about it and about that, and he hooked me up with Dick. That's what he was. So he was my introduction to Dick in terms of an actual connection to Martin. And what Dick said was based on what Tim saw at your grand opening. He said, "Well, find a dealer in New York City, and we'll have a clinic." And so I got into that. I actually went to Guitar Center. Eventually, went all the way up to the head of acoustic guitars at their home office. And they didn't want to have one in Manhattan. They were more interested in having one in one of their outer borough locations to try to get people to come to it, that sort of thing. And so I then call up, Dick or send him an email about this. What I did not know at the time is that the person in charge of clinics was Dick's assistant. And he, I guess, had his nose out of joint because this had all gone over his head. And it was definitely something that this was kind of his power island there at the time. Also, the rep in that territory was an old, grumpy old man who didn't have any interest in having anything to do with clinics. So it was just basically stonewalled and it never happened. So, but through that, I got to know Dick and I got to know Tim better, and and all that. So that's how that started to come about. And then I started going to the factory when the NAMM models would come out. So I'm not exactly sure when that happened, but I started going to the factory and I would just show up in the lobby with a camcorder and started making my videos and started putting them online. And this is all long before I started my website. At first I was just, putting this on out there. And, the one man's guitar thing, was coming later. Though I guess not all that much later. I got to remember when that was. But also another thing happened at the first Martin Fest. I heard, and some people have heard this story before, but I'm sitting inside the cabin playing somebody's amazing Martin, and I hear somebody say, "And that Todd Stewart Phillips." And now I'm going to actually go on another quick tangent. You were saying about me knowing more about Martins. There's certainly an awful lot of people who knew more about Martins than I did on the forum at that time. And Tony Phillips was one of those guys who already knew an awful lot about Martins. Yep. And true. And he and I had met in pre-Martin Fest because I wanted to find somebody who was crazy enough to pay the price to be in the very front section to see Crosby, Nash and Young on their reunion tour at Madison Square Garden, and he wanted to do that. So I think this is also 2002. This is February 2002, because I was doing it for my birthday. And that's how we met. And we met up at Mandolin Brothers and with another fellow that come all the way from Columbus, Ohio, from a different guitar forum to see the show with us. And so that's where Tony and I had become friends. And he was already well on his way to a guitar collection the first time I came over to his apartment and had dinner with him and his wife. And I remember he had more than just Martins, but he had I remember he had the Hank Williams model, and I can't remember. That's the one I was, very impressed with the most of the things that he had. He also had what's the fella's name? I can always get on this program and I can't remember his name. He built guitars. Jackson Browne played his guitars back in the day, and he was credited for basically inventing the modern Mortison tenon neck. What the hell's his name?
Michael Gurian.
Gurian, thank you. Yeah, and Tony had a Gurian at that time, among other kinds of various guitars. But anyway, so that was the. I had met Tony before the first Martin Fest, and he was at the first Martin Fest. We went together, in fact, and almost, it was so hot. It was over 100 degrees, and we stopped by the Pizza Hut for a pizza and pitchers of beer. So we were very late getting to the factory, to the park, and before we met all those fine people. But anyway, so he and I met back then. He certainly knew an awful lot, and now I've confused myself with my own tangents. So what did I interrupt? I was about to say that related to my connection to Martin. Oh, I was at the factory. I would go to the factory and put these videos up. And then I started getting to know Mike. And Michael and I, we just like you and I, Michael and I, one thing we had in common were The Simpsons. We had a great love of Simpsons humor and stuff like that. And we also had a tendency to prank each other. And so I'm there with there's some video out there still showing, I'm like, he's supposed to help me set up my camera and help focus it when I'm going to sit there and play the guitars that have been set out there. And he starts talking on the video and he says, and now Todd, he moves over and is going to be moving in to this little space behind the stairway and, starts talking about that stuff. So that's as close as I came from going in and occupying an office. But
I wish that could have happened.
But so, yes, and another prank. Here's some other pranks he's played on me. I'll just say very quickly. So eventually, it got so noisy there. The whole thing got so popular of people coming and playing the guitars that I really couldn't do my videos. And so he let me go back and do them in the hallway right past the little repair room behind a closed door. And you could go in. There was a little nook off to the side, and then there was a fire exit. Well, some beehived, cat-eyed, glass-wearing bitty-body came back there to get something and saw me there. And the next thing I know, it's a fire hazard because I'm blocking a fire exit. So Michael said, okay, fine, we'll just put him in the sound room. And so he just took me back without any authority other than his own and I started using the sound room, and I would start kicking out the two young guys back at the sound room. But, fortunately, there were people at Martin that appreciated what I did, and among them were Fred Green and Jeff Allen, who two are when it comes to people that are out on the floor that don't have an office upstairs in Mount Olympus, they are, officers of the executives of the company. And they would always come by and talk to me when I was in the sound room, and ask me what I thought about this or what about that, and that kind of stuff. And Bruce Mariano, when he was in charge of strings, started giving me strings to try. And it was just that kind of thing. And back then, particularly, they were much more family business than corporation, and a lot, and the human relationships mattered a lot to them. So that's really how I got involved with them and started doing what I was doing. Jeff and Fred both and Tim would start giving me inside information. I started getting invited because I would go in there and they would have R&D stuff in there. And at first they would have to have them covered up. They would cover them up so I couldn't see them. And and eventually they stopped doing that because they wanted to show me things. Say, what do you think of this? And they knew that I wouldn't blab about it. So, and I've always been that way. I don't until, and this was long before I became an official press person that started getting their press people getting a hold of me and sharing stuff with me. And that was after One Man's Guitar came out. And this was, I'd been doing it for quite a while before that stuff started happening. But
it's kind of funny. Lori and I have a running joke where, we'll often, we were a dealer from 2003 to 2023, and, the NAMM information would come down at a certain time. The dealers would find out about something. And then between NAMM shows, it was always a chance that somebody would announce something at Martin, but before the public sees it, the dealers would see it. And I'd be in the custom shop sometimes with Tim Teal, and I'm like, am I allowed to see that? He's like, yeah, that's okay. I said, am I allowed to tell Spoon? Spoon knows about it. And it was everything I learned. Like, I got this inside stuff. It was after you. And there were times we'd get a newsletter or a mail from an email from our rep. And Lori would say, that's pretty interesting. I bet you Spoon found out about that 3 months ago. I said, probably.
Well, it depends. That wasn't always the case, but yeah, even before there was anything, I had any official status with them at all in terms of press. I would never post anything online ahead of release or ahead of what they would consider their press embargo, unless somebody else had already broke it. I mean, if Jason Isabel, he posted about his prototype of his signature model, then that became free game, and then I could, then I had no qualms whatsoever about posting stuff, and even before my website, to posting it on the forum and stuff. So, but just to go back to the Michael thing real quick, I had one of the great things about going to the factory and seeing the new models on NAMM Day. So when everybody else was going out and not being able to hear the guitars, I could actually hear them and be able to describe them and get decent video even before I started using mics and recording programs and all that. And one time Tim was there taking me through. I guess he knew I was there, but he came out to see me and he decided to give me a full rundown of all of the models. And this was the year of the OM 21 Special, which was Martin's, as Martin is famous for doing. They wanted to introduce Spanish cedar necks. So this was going to be a fancy model they were going to introduce this on. And they had gone into the factory and they were looking for inspiration, and they saw a 0021 from the early 1900s that had a Spanish cedar neck, and so that's when they decided to do it, and they decided they were going to do it in old style 21, and that disappeared in 1939 or whenever herringbone went away, but he wanted to do an OM. He knew he wanted to do an OM, and that's how that all came together. So I think that was the same time that Brazilian Rosewood Madagascar Rosewood was 1 year old at Martin. You could not order a custom guitar in those days. You couldn't order any kind of special feature or anything, or basic guitar on a existing model until it'd been around for 1 year. Yep. So I said to Tim, does that mean I can order a Madagascar Rosewood guitar today? And this girl was walking by, and young woman, but she was quite young, was walking by, and he said, would you ask Mr. Fair to come out here? And Mr. Fair, Bob Fair, came out with the pencil behind his ear and his little jotter pot, and I said, is it true that we can start ordering Madagascar Rosewood guitars? And he looked at Tim, and they looked at each other, and he took his jotter out and said, what do you want? And so we specced out what became a short scale Lawrence Juber Madagascar, guitar that Jim Kalika now owns and loves. That I could no longer play because of the big fat V-neck and 30 style heel and all that. But fortunately, my dealer happened to be standing right there in the room, so I turned to Maury and said, and they worked it out and they got a price, and that was that. So that's one advantage of that stuff. But somebody was posting on the unofficial Martin Guitar Forum about there's no such thing as the Martin Custom Shop. That everything just goes through the line. And somebody's saying, well, that's not true. There is a custom shop office where Bob and his assistant sit. And they decided, instead of taking away the most valuable and senior craftsmen and women in cloistering them in a custom shop, they left them out there, but custom orders just went to them, and they all had to sign off on the sheet as it went through and all that. People are having this, all this big discussion. So I said, well, actually, I have super secret photos of the real custom shop, and I posted a series of pictures showing Homer Simpson sleeping at his desk covered with food and and all that stuff, and I said, here's a picture of Bob Fair, and it showed a picture of Homer like pointing sternly at a drawing that was some sort of car or whatever, but I replaced it with a really bad child's drawing of a guitar, this sort of thing. And I had a custom on the way at that time that I had ordered through you, which was a custom mahogany M cutaway. So it was like a M style, based on the Lawrence Juber mahogany model, and that was forthcoming, and it was going to be delivered to me at Martin Fest. And so, and I had gotten an email from Michael saying that he said, as he often says, he says, every time you post something on the internet, it causes a meeting, and I don't like meetings. So I'm there, and here comes Michael. He was supposed to deliver my custom shop guitar, and he was letting me know that the people in the custom shop did not appreciate these pictures. I was very apologetic because I didn't know he was, ribbing me about it at the time. So he shows up with my custom Martin, and he drops a pillowcase full of charred wood and charred ashes with a guitar neck, saying this was my new custom Martin. The other time he pranked me. Yeah, also pranked me with the custom deep body OM42 that someone was happened to be at the factory and was going to pick it up for me. And they drive to, and I'm working on the help desk at a law firm at the time. And very, very busy day. And suddenly my guitar is ready downstairs. So I zoom down the elevator, and I have to go across the street in busy traffic just a block from Grand Central Station. And the guy opens his trunk, and I grab the back seat, and I grab the guitar, and I go up, and it sits there, and Tony's like, well, you have to open it, before I get back on it. So I open it up, and it's completely destroyed. It's like a broken guitar that's just like flattened and cracked and just torn to bits. And
wow.
And I knew I'd been punked yet again. So I'm not mentioning online any of the things I've done to Michael that
No.
That all of these things typically were a retaliation for things I did to Michael, but I'm not going to.
Those of you listening at home, you have to wonder who's winning this game. It sounds like it's all been done to Spoon, but I bet you Mike has some good stories he has to share with us sooner than later too. So I'll have to ring him up later and just say, if you have 2 minutes, just tell me all the times that Spoon deserved it, and if he tells me anything on the phone, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Tomorrow.
All right. Well, the only one I'll say, because I've said it before, was at one of it was the very first Martin Owners Club meeting when Martin Fest they were trying to turn Martin Fest into the Martin's Owners Club meeting. And so it was packed full of people and from all over. And Michael's assignment was to stand in front of the museum and hand out leaflets of some sort. And he had just been promoted to, not promoted, but he'd left customer service by this time, and he had just become the exotic wood buyer. That's what they called him, and exotic timbers. And so where Linda was in charge of rosewood, mahogany, and koa, and those kind of woods, Michael was in charge of sourcing the new modern woods, the Liptus and the sapele, and all those kinds of woods. And so I bought him, as a gift, a classic safari pith helmet, the big safari helmet. And I made a special Martin Fest name tag for him that had two big coconut trees, and it said exotic wood buyer, and it said Bwana Dickinson. And if you remember the old Tarzan movies where Bwana was what the African natives always called the big white hunters and all that. Not exactly politically correct, but it said Bwana Dickinson.
Oh,
and when I was giving it to him, up walks the president, Keith Lombardi, and Michael's, one of the other higher bosses. And they say, okay, well, you have to wear this for the rest of the day.
I remember that.
And so they made him wear that and the pith helmet while he's standing in front of the factory handing out stuff. And he just looked at me and said, I'll get you for this. and that, I think, resulted in the crushed guitar in the case.
Oh, well. And he did get you.
And the poor guy who had to wait downstairs for me to come back down to get the real guitar. But
okay.
So anyway.
I was going to say, did you ever get the right stuff?
Yeah, it was still down there. And the guy had to sit there and wait there double parked until the joke was discovered. So,
the lengths he will go to, right?
So anyway, I don't know. This may be boring lots of people to death, but it's fun for me to go down memory lane. It was a nice surprise. So thank you for letting me indulge. But that's really it. Again, it's people relationships. Jeff Allen started sending me. When the CO7 came out, I actually got the real Draftsman drawings. I have those, and I have and I've learned that the real measurements that Martin uses aren't the ones it's not the ones that they actually put on there. There are so many decimal points on some of those measurements.
Wow.
Everything from bracing to body length, all those kind of things. The real measurements are company secrets. They always, they don't kind of share that stuff. I got the scoop on the Outlaw models when those came out. That was the first model that was allowed to have authentic series bracing, but I had modern stuff attached to it as well. So that's why Jeff always considered it an outlaw, sort of thing, and various other little things like that that have been fun to know and keep under my hat. And I asked permission, when there was arguments about that model, I asked permission what I could say, what I was allowed to say, and they told me you can tell people this just to get the facts straight when people were talking about the Outlaw, the D18 Outlaw, or whatever it ultimately was called. But yeah, so I still remain friends with those people. A lot of my friends have long retired. Dale Eckert. I'm not Dale Eckert. Rich Eckert and Dave Strunk are gone. Dave Musselwhite retired a long time ago. And people that I had met during my early years there, most of them are gone.
Bob Fair,
Sandy, Sandy from customer service, and her husband Dale, the fabulous inlay artist who's still in business for himself.
Trock.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I've met new people there. I've got to know younger people and new people and become friends with them too. But
so the Cliff Notes version of it is you're getting involved with Martin is partially my fault.
In a lot of ways, it's entirely your fault. If you hadn't asked me to come, who knows with the various Martin Fests over the years, I would, because the whole clinic thing, the whole conversation happened at the following Martin Fest. Dick and I sat down on top of a picnic table at the end of one of the days at the park, and really got to know each other and talk it out and talk about how to go about becoming a clinician there. And
it's just such a science fiction thing. To think about like a parallel universe or two timelines that run parallel. If you would have become a clinician in 2002, Guitar Center would have wanted you to do a clinic in downtown, and then fast forward, would you ever have really which paths would have really crossed? Because would that have meant you and I remain friends, and you never did videos here, or that you would do videos here and clinics, or would you have been a clinician as a sole career? It's so interesting to think of 20 years ago where the paths would have intersected if they would have at all.
That's an interesting question. And that goes back to one of the original queries that you brought up at the very beginning. I have never worked for Martin, and I've never been an employee, and that would have changed if I had been a clinician. I would have been a contract employee. I would have certainly not been somebody at Martin, but I had not worked. The very first official thing I ever did for Martin where I got paid money was write the article about the custom shop models that was in the journal. The journal they put out every year. I've written other articles for them since then, but that was the very first time I was ever engaged by Martin to do anything. And there again, I'm not a Martin employee. And I knew a long time ago that if I ever started, people say, why don't you go work for Martin? Why don't they hire you? The moment I would be a Martin employee, I would have to shut my mouth. I would not be able to speak on the internet, casually. Would have to be able to give my personal opinion about models. People would, accuse me of being a shill for Martin on the forums. You're not going to find a bigger loudmouth critic of the mortise and tenon neck joint And the fact that the company line back then was it had no effect on tone whatsoever. Other things like that. I've always been, in good faith, but I can happily be critical of Martin's some of the things they do in their policies and stuff like that. For what I feel, with the community of Martin lovers and the company's interests in mind when it comes to that kind of stuff. But
you're here.
So so that's how did I become a clinician? I don't know. Howie Emerson was a clinician who came to the first Martin Fest and performed at the Martin Fest, and they gave him an OM 18V to play at his clinic, and he did that for a while. And I first met him. I'd already had his album, Crossing Crystal Lake, which is spectacular. Yeah, it's one of my favorite guitar albums. Before I met him, and Tony and I had gone out to the old guitar show they used to have out on Long Island before its benefactor, the guy from Tom's River who died way too young, Scott Chinnery. Before he died, he had funded a guitar show out there, and I met Howie at the Martin booth that year. That's when we first met, and that was before Martin Fest. But so, he was a clinician for a little while. They had various clinicians. Other than Diane Ponzio, who was an actual Martin employee, they tended to go with artists. And I understand the logic behind why they didn't make me a clinician. I wasn't famous, and I wasn't a hotshot guitar player, not certainly anywhere along the lines of Howie Emerson or, Lawrence Juber, for example, the Grammy winner. And that was part of it, but also they were already looking toward the youth market and worrying about the youth market at that time, even 20 years ago. And so they had a major problem. Some people inside Martin had a major problem of having clinicians that had gray hair, and and to this day, they have these brand ambassadors, as they call them these days, that are young, upcoming influencers, and that makes perfect sense that they do that. Our friend who still does clinics with Chris Martin, Craig Thatcher, he became good friends with Dick, and again, the people connection. Craig was the only person in the history that was sanctioned to be an Eric Clapton tribute artist. And, and he's a spectacular guitar player. And so he, spent a lot of years basically doing a Eric Clapton tribute act. And long before he started doing stuff for Martin. But again, he lives in that area. They became friends. So he's kind of an exception in terms of somebody who's older, who is, it represents the brand in an official capacity. So I know where we're coming from at that time. They were looking for people that were going to appeal to people in college, and
sure.
Not that I don't think I would have done a good job, for me, it would be more about talking about them, and I am proficient enough of a guitar player that I could demonstrate the models, without any problem, as you've shown when you guys came to me and asked me to start doing that for you. So
I would think so.
For which I
we're extremely excited
grateful.
when we were able to talk you into doing videos for us. She saw what you were doing at your videos at Martin, and we're like, oh, if we could only get something like that for our website. And when you said yes, we were both, I don't know if we let you see how excited we were, but we really were,
Well, I was flattered, and I had various ideas of how to go about it, and she basically said, no, and we want you to do what you do on your website. And so that's what I did, except I talk about it instead of write about it, and
right.
And which gives me plenty of opportunities to misremember and get my facts wrong, but usually you're pretty good at making sure it's corrected with a little dash that comes across saying, wrong, but not exactly that.
I can't tell you how many rolls of film, and I'm saying that, tongue in cheek, we have over the years since 2006 probably until now, of every single video begins with, okay, look this up. Does this have a Stratobond neck, or is, I'm like, hold on. And every single video starts with me being like,
there are times when you've had to clue me in because I just want to check something here. Speaking of that, I want to fact check something myself right now. It's not important. It was something I was going to do, but then I realized that I don't have to guess the guitar today. I mean, I don't have to come up with the guitar today. You have to come up with the guitar today, so never mind.
That is right. What a lovely segue. I was going to do this 2 or 3 minutes ago, but let's get right to it. 20 questions.
Okay, yeah, and I just have to say, when we did 20 questions last time, I didn't know the answer because I couldn't remember if that model had been around before 2000 when you'd asked me that, but I'm pretty sure it was. But anyway, so I was going to double check on another model, but I will save it for next week because I just remembered it's your turn. So it's my turn to ask the questions. It's your turn to come up with the guitar that is still in existence and purchasable out there somewhere online. And I get 20 questions in which to guess what model that is, but I only get 3 guesses among those 20 questions as to what model it might be. And if you remember last week, Maury was almost out of guesses when he nailed it.
Because Maury spent two questions early with model names, and he had to go the other 18 with only one left. And I think I got pretty creative on basically asking you, was it this guitar, without asking you, was it this guitar? Don't paint yourself into that corner this time. 20 questions on the clock, and go.
Don't tell me what to do.
Oh, that wasn't a question.
Inside joke we have. Okay. My first question is this guitar made in Nazareth, Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Is this guitar a dreadnought?
No.
Okay, well then. Does this guitar have a long scale neck?
Yes. Do you give up?
If you could be like the Simpsons and go inside my brain, there would just be that toy monkey with the cymbals, not able to think of anything. Okay. Is this guitar an OM?
No.
Does this guitar have a grand performance body shape?
No.
Is this guitar the M36?
Yes. Congratulations. How'd you get it that fast?
Well, you know, when you're a fan of the English national soccer team, like I am, you have to be pretty intelligent. Go England! Go England!
England. Go.
I'm just celebrating their recent success in the Euros. Anyway,
Who cares?
Well, it could have been a jumbo. It could have been an M.
Yeah.
There's only one M currently made available for sale, and so I thought better get that out of the way first. So,
Spoken like a true Martin expert.
and you know what that means? It's about time they introduce another M into the lineup.
I would think so. I'm still surprised there is not a mahogany companion to the M36.
Very good point. I've only ever seen one M18 in my life. And I wish that, I think that's definitely one they would bring back. I've also only ever seen one J21 in my life. But
Oh, I've never seen that.
both of them were owned by people I knew. But yes. Unfortunately, it was stolen not that long ago, and he was crushed, absolutely crushed. It was his only acoustic guitar. And sneak thief, the door was unlocked. It was in his living room, and then it was gone. So,
Wow.
and I'm trying to remember what he ended up buying and replace it. I was surprised it wasn't another jumbo. He ended up going with like a 0028, I think, or something like that. But anyway, sad tale.
Anyway, thank you again, Billy Kebab 1, for bringing us this great topic today. As we mentioned at the beginning of Season 5, we're going to do our very best to take some listener suggestions and maybe fill this whole season, if not the whole thing, with viewer requests. Last week, we did the Marshall Fleischer changes in Martin production over the years. This one was all about Billy Kebab and how Spoon got involved with Martin. Tune in next week when we most likely bring you another great topic, and we know it's great because it was your idea. From all of us at Martins and More, thanks for listening.
Hear you later.